say that one. And if we've got the clause in there that says that each and every individual has these rights, how do we then say what you just said, is that the many will outweigh that one particular clause? So, like Sean, I don't have an answer to your question. I don't think anyone in this room has an answer.
That's just the way I feel about it.
Back to what Mr. Buchanan said, is that if there are enough people, if the many say, yes, we need to outrule this group of people for whatever reason, they're doing something that the many thinks is not appropriate, we can always amend the Constitution if it rises to that level. So that's one of the nice safety valves there.
And really the power of the majority of people, I think, is in large part, and particularly in the last 20, 30 years, what has shaped the Constitution and how the Supreme Court tends to view it. I mean, in the last generation, there's been lots of organized support of groups that have an agenda of, I want to see the Constitution move in this way. Abortion, pro-life groups have, since Roe versus Wade, been continually trying to move the Constitution back in a pro-life direction. Gun rights groups for quite some time tried to move the courts to establish the right to bear arms as an individual right, and were successful in persuading the Supreme Court about 10 years ago on that. So the power of the majority seems to maybe not directly within the system, but working on the system from the outside, can kind of shape the Constitution the way it's interpreted.
Thank you, Sean. I had a question. Matt, you were speaking of hypothetically speeding, speaking just hypothetically, and being stopped by a hypothetical policeman. Now, if
there was no hypothetical about it. I was late, so I was going back.
Well, if that police officer had asked to search your car, you would have the right to say no, but then could he hold you there until he got a warrant and search it anyway?
Well, as the Fourth Amendment says right there, that no warrant shall be issued but for probable cause shown. So the answer to your question is yes, but he's got to have probable cause.
Okay.
So, for example, he pulls me over, maybe he sees something in my car or he smells something and he wants to look further. Can I search your car? I say, no, you cannot. That is my right. Okay. If he has enough there that he believes that there is a criminal offense occurring, then he can go and he can hold me and go get a warrant, have a judge review his narrative of how everything happened and what he sees, smells, hears, and then the judge can say, okay, there is probable cause to believe that the criminal offense occurred. Now you can go search that. And maybe you can seize that item or seize the person and put him in jail.
But if it goes to court, then the judge would decide whether that officer actually did have probable cause. And if the judge thinks that he didn't, then that would be thrown out.
So, yes, he wouldn't necessarily look at all on his own. But,
right.
Like I'm the prosecutor, you have a defense attorney that represents people. That defense attorney might say, I don't think there was actually probable cause here. And then the judge, maybe a different judge, would look at it and reweigh everything and say, you know what, I think the guy's right. I think the defense attorney's right. There was not probable cause. There should not have been this search. I'm going to dismiss the case.
Just having Grateful Dead sticker on your bumper shouldn't be cause enough to... Okay, one other thing, and then I'll shut up, and hopefully we'll have another question or two. And we will eat, I promise. I like eating, okay? So does everybody. All right, this question. This is something I've always been concerned about. The police stopping people at these checking points, to check for sobriety, I suppose, and you're pulled over, I don't know, they pull everybody or every fifth driver or something. And you haven't done anything illegally, and you haven't done anything in the way you operate your car to give anybody any reason to suspect that you're driving illegally or under any influence. Isn't there a right to be left alone?
So, I think the answer to your question and the answer to your concern is twofold. Number one, I would say driving is a privilege. And so I think the courts have said if you are going to exercise that privilege, we can, under very narrow circumstances, maybe, I don't want to say bend the Constitution, but we can make it flexible for this to see if people are complying and not breaking the law. What Dr. Buchanan's talking about is, some people call them sobriety checkpoints, where they basically divert you off the road, ask you a few questions, okay, you're not drinking, move along. But then the question is, well, what's the reason for the stop? Why am I being stopped? What offense did I commit? And the answer is there is no offense. And there's a lot of case law on it with the United States Supreme Court, the Indiana Supreme Court, and what has come down is basically there's a very narrow set of rules that they have to follow. That the length of the stop can't be too long. They can't keep you there to keep asking you questions and questions to try to make you get tripped up so that, okay, now we can go further. So the length of the stop is one. Is it just to limit to this area? Do they have, I'm trying to think of all of them, but are they going to do it on an everyday basis? Is it going to be every night at this one place? Or are they going to just have them randomly? That's another one. But they've said that you can do it. It's got to be followed. The protocols have to be followed. And I'll tell you, those are regularly challenged. Because if you get stopped at one of those, it's almost the first thing that the defense attorney would do is to say, well, I'm going to challenge that because I don't think the protocols are followed.
Good, thank you. Okay, I can't help it, I'm excited. But, anytime one of you want to jump in too, but this came to my mind as well from personal experience. Nowadays, if you want to get a job, as you folks know or soon will find out, you generally have to pass a drug test. Now, to me, that seems to fly in the face of the backbone of our law, which is that you're innocent until proven guilty. Mandating that somebody take a drug test when, again, they haven't exhibited any behavior comparable to somebody using drugs, doesn't that violate their right, again, to be left alone? Why do you make somebody prove they're not a drug user when there's no reason to suspect that they are in the first place? And employers, how do they get away with that?
I would just say that I think the first answer is that the Constitution, and for the most part, you'd probably be talking about private employers,
yes.
And the Constitution doesn't really have anything to say in the private relations between an employee and employer. I mean, they can choose to submit to that test or if they'd like, and if they want the opportunity to be employed by the company.
Okay, so it's a private thing, and the employer doesn't have the right to throw the power of government at you. It just has the right to not hire you. Did you want to say anything?
Oh, I think that's a good answer. I was going to defer to Sean on that one.
Yeah. Well, that was something I was always concerned about. It just seems like we've let a lot of our rights go by, and I always feel that nowadays the idea seems to be we are guilty until we're proven innocent. But I'm glad you helped explain that. I appreciate it. I'm actually going to shut up. Any questions from you folks? Yes.
When a search warrant is issued, does it state what item they're searching for in the location?
Great question. It has to, yeah. It
Okay.
has to say exactly what is going to be searched, where it's going to be searched, and where they believe it to be found. And if it doesn't, then it's invalid. And
So if they end up finding something else that may be illegal, can they still prosecute you for that?
they can, yes, as long as it's found within the confines of that search warrant. So for example, if I have a duffel bag on this table and they get a search warrant to search the duffel bag because they think marijuana's in there, they can smell it, we'll say. But then they find illegal guns or cocaine or other items that are illegal. They can still prosecute me for all of those because they just stuck within that duffel bag. But then if they start going outside of it and start searching another room or like a shed to a house, or maybe there's something else around the house and they start searching that, that's when you start saying, well, that's a violation, you went too far, and you cannot prosecute for that.
Okay, so it's more based on the location, not necessarily the item they would be searching for.
Correct.
I saw your hand first, and then we'll go to you.
So would they have to get a separate warrant to do that?
Yes, they would.
That's why if you're served a warrant, it behooves you to check that, right? Don't just assume that they filled everything out correctly. If I'm somebody and the police come to my house with a search warrant, hopefully this will never happen, but I'm darn well going to look at that very carefully. And if I see a mistake, I might just keep my lip buttoned at that time and wait till we go to court and say, hey, you had the wrong address on there. You put the wrong date
But,
down.
you know, it happens, because
Yeah.
just recently I had one where we did a search warrant, they executed the search warrant, and while they're in the middle of it, they realized, oh my gosh, we left off this item that we thought was here. So then we stopped, went back to the judge, got him to sign a new warrant that said, you know, this item now is included, then we went back and started the search again. So it happens, But, you know, to Dr. Buchanan's point, you gotta be careful on what they're searching for.
Yeah, Kayla, did you have a question?
I have I don't know what it is. I don't even know if it really goes to the Constitution at all, but there's been a lot of cases, like with that Brock case recently, where there's been a huge injustice to the crime that was committed and the sentencing. And then recently, this was a judge up in Canada, so it doesn't really relate to our government, but the judge made some very rude comments to the rape victim, saying, well, why didn't you just keep your mouth shut? You know, what happens to those judges when such injustices happen,
Well,
such as that?
It's interesting because at the federal level, there's appointed judges, at least in the United States. So they're appointed, and they're not elected on a regular basis. So let's say the judge says that he can be disciplined, or she can be disciplined for saying those things. If it rises so high in the, I guess, the shock value, they
This one was
may
pretty
take
shock
them off the
value.
bench.
Yeah.
But it's not an automatic taking them off the bench. At the state level, at least in Indiana, we have elected judges. And so they are on a 6-year term. So let's say a judge does that over and over again. The Marshall County as a whole can say, we don't like that judge doing that. We're going to elect somebody else that isn't going to do that. So there's sort of that safety valve too.
And also beyond just the election, really with any of the judges in the federal or the state system, there's a process where you can lodge a complaint against them, and then there's going to be a body of other lawyers, or here would ultimately go to the Indiana Supreme Court, who's going to make a decision on whether that violated what they have called the canons or code of judicial conduct. It's basically rules that the judges are supposed to follow to be, show that they're going to be impartial and fair and not act in ways that just are,
At the federal level, but all you can do is hope for impeachment, I suppose,